What defines us as humans? Obviously, we are bipedal apes with little hair, and at first glance, we don't seem to have any particularly incredible abilities, but what truly distinguishes us is our brain and our ability to communicate in an incredibly sophisticated way. We don't have just one language, but hundreds, even thousands. It depends on how you define it. We are also tool-dependent. Basically, we couldn't do nearly anything without them, but this also means that we have the ability to create and use them. We are creative, and thanks to our tools and language, we have managed to express complex and abstract ideas. And in general, this is what has led us to conquer the entire planet. But where does all this come from? Well, if we start tracing where all these characteristics come from, we would have to go quite far back in time to owners of skulls like this one. This is Sangjiran 17, or at least a plastic replica. It was excavated on the island of Java, Indonesia, and belonged to someone who lived around 1.5 million years ago. Today, we call them Homo erectus, and they are the first hominids that truly deserve to be called human. From their biology to their technology, their global expansion, and even their possible artistic and linguistic abilities, these individuals were a huge leap in human evolution. Today, I want to explore what makes them so special and why I believe they are the first true humans. Homo erectus is one of the most studied fossils, but their origins remain a mystery. Around 2.5 million years ago, after a major glaciation, several species of early Homo and Australopithecus coexisted in East Africa. However, the identities of these species are still debated. For a long time, Homo habilis was considered the first of our genus because it was found alongside stone tools. But some anthropologists think it was too primitive to be considered part of our genus and classify it more as a type of Australopithecus. Then there's Homo rudolfensis, which looks like a larger version of habilis, but it's not even clear if it's a distinct species. Due to these confusions, many experts simply refer to them as the first Homo. But with the line between Australopithecus and Homo still fuzzy, it's hard to know exactly when and where Homo erectus appeared. The oldest Homo erectus fossils accepted by the scientific community are about 1.9 million years old and come from Kubifora in Kenya. But here's the interesting part. One of the most famous Homo erectus fossils wasn't found in Africa, but in Georgia, and dates back to about 1.8 million years ago. Yes, Georgia in Eurasia. This shows that Homo erectus was already migrating out of Africa soon after its emergence. And here's a fun fact. They didn't need a huge brain to do it. While we often think of ourselves as brains on legs, Homo erectus had a smaller brain than ours, but that didn't stop them from conquering half the world. Within what we call Homo erectus, there's a great variety. They lived for 1.8 million years across 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And their diversity is so vast that sometimes they're classified as different species, like Homo ergaster. But today, we won't complicate things with that. The important thing is that Homo erectus was a pioneer. They were the first to master fire, to make more advanced tools, the famous Acheulean hand axes, and possibly to develop rudimentary forms of art and language. In short, Homo erectus was the first hominid to combine all the characteristics we associate with humanity, not only using tools, but also improving them. They left Africa and adapted to completely new environments. Additionally, some experts believe they may have had basic forms of art or complex communication. So the next time you look in the mirror, remember that much of what you are began with these incredible travelers millions of years ago. Why is Homo erectus so special? Although there's a lot of variation among Homo erectus fossils, and they lived for an enormous amount of time, almost 2 million years, there are some key features that unite them and make them definitively Homo erectus. Compared to the early Homo and Australopithecus, they had larger bodies, smaller teeth, and less prominent jaws. But the first major change was their larger brain. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe. We have set the goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers before the first half of this year, and with your support, we can achieve it. Join this community and let's make this channel grow together. The early Homo erectus, sometimes called Homo ergaster, like those found in Dmanisi, Georgia, had a brain of about 540 cubic centimeters. That's larger than a chimpanzee's brain, but not by much. However, if we jump forward 500,000 years to fossils like Sangjiran 17 in Indonesia, we see that their brains had grown to around 1,200 cubic centimeters. To put it into perspective, a modern Homo sapiens, like you or me, has a brain of about 13 to 50 cubic centimeters. In just 500,000 years, they almost tripled the size of their brain. That's a huge and significant change. Homo erectus was the first hominid with the ability to run long distances. We know this from their bowl-shaped pelvis, which allowed for efficient running biomechanics. According to mathematical models, they might have been able to run for 5 consecutive hours. That's much more than most of us could do today. But how could they run so much without overheating? Here's another fascinating fact. Genetic studies suggest that genes for dark skin evolved around 1.2 million years ago. This means that by then, Homo erectus had lost most of their body hair and was exposed to the sun. So they were almost certainly the first hairless hominids. These traits, large brains, ability to run, and hairless skin, aren't just curiosities. Together, they represent a radical shift in the morphological and behavioral package of Homo erectus. They no longer resembled an upright walking chimpanzee. They looked much more like us. They walked long distances to get food, and their diet was of high quality. To fuel that expanding brain, they needed nutrient-rich foods, and they didn't settle for just anything. The bones they left behind show that they had access to the most nutritious parts of large animals like hippos and giraffes. This suggests that they were not only skilled hunters, but also knew how to make the most of their prey. Running and hunting are great, but there's something that defines us as modern humans. Language. So, could Homo erectus speak? This is a tricky question. For language to exist, certain biological conditions must be met. The first is a large brain, and as we've seen, Homo erectus had that. But a large brain doesn't automatically mean it's wired for language. Here's an interesting fact. Some scientists believe that Homo erectus might have had a basic form of communication, maybe not as complex as ours, but enough to coordinate hunts or pass on knowledge. For language to exist, you need not only a large brain, but it also has to function at a much higher cognitive level. However, according to recent studies, there are a couple of genes related to increased brain connectivity, and they seem to have evolved right when Homo erectus appeared in the archaeological record. I'm not saying that Homo erectus had a language as complex as ours, far from it. But like everything in evolution, language is a trait that developed gradually. It's also unlikely that it appeared out of nowhere only in Homo sapiens. So it's not far-fetched to think that the foundational blocks of language might be found in Homo erectus. Maybe they had some form of rudimentary communication, like a sophisticated sign language. Of course, it's hard to know for sure because words and gestures don't preserve in the archaeological record. But if we look at the tools and technology they left behind, it's clear that these individuals were very intelligent. The technology that Homo erectus is most known for, and that likely gave them a key evolutionary advantage, is fire. The main theory is that earlier hominids spent a huge amount of time and energy digesting raw meat and hard-to-chew foods. That's why the Australopithecus had such thick and robust jaws. But once we developed fire, it did much of the work for us. Cooking food allowed our intestines to do less work, and our brains could absorb that extra energy, allowing them to grow to the size they have now. It's a great theory, but there's a problem. The oldest evidence of controlled fire that most archaeologists accept is only 780,000 years old and comes from Israel. That's much later than the appearance of large brains in the fossil record. However, there are older sites, like Kubifora in Kenya, that could push the controlled use of fire back to 1.5 million years ago. The problem is that it's hard to confirm, as fires can also occur naturally. How did they survive without fire? This raises a fascinating question. If Homo erectus expanded into colder territories, how did they do it without fire for warmth? Perhaps they huddled together to keep warm, or maybe they had some rudimentary form of clothing. Or both, or neither? Here's an intriguing idea. Maybe our ancestors didn't even cook with fire. Soil analysis in the Olduvai Gorge, dated to about 1.7 million years ago, suggests that the area might have had natural hot springs. This led researchers to wonder, what role did this hot water play in our evolution? Instead of roasting meat and plants, did they boil them? I personally love this idea. Imagine a group of Homo erectus around a hot spring cooking their food in hot water. Not only is it a fascinating image, but it could also explain how they managed to expand without relying on fire. But speaking of water, there's another big debate about Homo erectus and its relationship with it. The mystery of the migrations to the islands. When Homo erectus left Africa, they didn't do it consciously. They were probably just following animals, taking advantage of the ecological niches they could occupy. Basically, they followed their food and as a result, expanded throughout the world passively. But in Southeast Asia, things might have been different. Recently, a new hominid was discovered on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. Also, a few years ago, stone tools were found in the Philippines dating back 700,000 years. The fascinating thing about these discoveries is that the Philippine Islands were already islands at that time. There is no plausible way a hominid could have walked there. At the very least, they would have had to cross a few kilometers of sea. This brings us to the big debate. How did they get there? Was it an accident? Maybe they were carried by a tsunami, or was it something deliberate? Did they venture to cross those few kilometers of sea to exploit a new territory? For now, it's something we can't answer with certainty. This is a Paleolithic hand axe, specifically from the Acheulean style. And no, this time it's not made of plastic. The evolution of Homo erectus coincides with the sudden appearance of this new type of tool in the archaeological record. While it seems simple, it was actually a giant leap for humanity. Before this, hominids made tools in the Oldowan style, which basically involved creating a cutting edge without giving much shape to the core of the stone. That was it. Acheulean tools, on the other hand, were flaked on both sides. It was a technological revolution. As you can see, it required the removal of many flakes to achieve such a precise shape. Even a simple tool might require the removal of 20 or 30 flakes. This demonstrates a level of creative thinking by Homo erectus. Imagine what that implies. Taking a rock and visualizing through a multi-step flaking process that inside it was a hand axe. It's frankly ingenious. It shows a level of intelligence and creativity that is unique to our species. The Swiss Army knife of prehistory. These Acheulean hand axes probably didn't have just one purpose. They were used for hunting, for butchering animals, and perhaps even for working wood and bone. They were basically the original Swiss Army knife, although admittedly they were quite heavy. Without a doubt, with a hand axe like this, you could butcher an animal or even kill something. There's no doubt about that. But how much did Homo erectus actually work with wood and bone? It's hard to say. The oldest wooden spears ever found are the Schoningen spears, which are about 500,000 years old. These survived in the archaeological record pretty much by sheer luck. They were probably made by a Neanderthal or Proto-Neanderthal, but this happened within the same period when Homo erectus was still around. Personally, I believe Homo erectus was more than capable of producing something similar. If they could take 20 or 30 steps to turn a rock into a hand axe, they could surely sharpen a stick, don't you think? As for bone tools, the record is scarce, but not non-existent. Some of the most distinctive ones come from the Olduvai Gorge, including this incredible barbed point. If Homo erectus really made this tool, and the evidence suggests they did, then it's another brilliant example of their intelligence. If making and using tools is a defining characteristic of humanity, then Homo erectus was definitely in the human club. There's no doubt about it. Of all the characteristics I've mentioned today, the production of art is probably the most defining. No other animal produces art like we Homo sapiens do. So, if I'm trying to decide whether Homo erectus was human or not, knowing whether they produced art is key. The best, and perhaps the only example of creative expression by a Homo erectus hominid is this shell found in Java. The layer it was found in dates from between 500,000 and 400,000 years ago, so there's no doubt it belongs to the Homo erectus period, not the Homo sapiens period. As you can see, someone scratched lines on the shell. Do these simple lines count as a creative expression, as a symbolic act, or were they just a careless moment from some ancient hominid? In my opinion, it doesn't matter. Either way, it's incredible. Just like language, I believe our artistic expression is something we have learned and evolved to do. The seeds of all the creativity we see around us today might have started with a simple, careless act. A scratch on a shell. Maybe that scratch caught the attention of the hominid who made it, and then they made another, and another, and another. In my personal opinion, these simple acts might have been the spark that connected a pair of neurons in the brain that weren't connected before, leading to all the beautiful things we see today. Wherever we find Homo erectus, we see that it lived for a very long time. Its fossil record spans nearly 2 million years, from around 2 million years ago in Ethiopia to as recently as 117,000 years ago in Java, Indonesia. So, what caused its extinction? We're not 100% sure, but it's likely that climate change played a significant role. For example, in Indonesia, the forests were rapidly turning into tropical jungles, like the ones we know today. As conditions became warmer and more humid, it's possible that Homo erectus couldn't adapt to these changes, the legacy of Homo erectus. Although Homo erectus disappeared, its legacy lives on. As it traveled around the world, it's possible it left behind populations that, through isolation, evolved into new species. A prime candidate is Homo floresiensis, found on the island of Flores in Indonesia. The fossils found so far date from between 700,000 and 70,000 years ago, which, in the context of human evolution, is very recent. Yes, in prehistory terms, 70,000 years ago is like yesterday. The adults of this species were only about a meter tall, which earned them the nickname of hobbits. Studies have come to different conclusions about their origin. Most suggest that Homo floresiensis descends from Homo erectus and underwent a phenomenon called insular dwarfism. However, not everyone agrees. Some argue that they could descend from an even older and unknown species due to certain primitive traits they exhibit. Could it be that some type of Australopithecus managed to leave Africa? Who knows, but since we know Homo erectus was in that region for a long time, it's the most plausible ancestor. Although the fact that Homo floresiensis likely suffered from insular dwarfism suggests that if Homo erectus was able to cross water, and I believe it did, it wasn't a frequent occurrence. If they could travel freely, they would have sought resources in other places, and the pressure for dwarfism wouldn't have been so pronounced. Another peculiar species, Homo naledi, has also been proposed as a possible descendant of Homo erectus. This hominid was discovered in 2013 in a deep cave in South Africa, where 15 individuals were recovered from a single chamber. Although we're not sure whether Homo erectus is its direct ancestor, it's a solid bet given the time range and the modern characteristics that Homo naledi exhibits, which are not found in early Homo or Australopithecus. What we do know with fairly strong certainty is that Homo erectus gave rise to at least 3 species: us, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. However, the identity of the last common ancestor among these 3 species remains hotly debated. We know that Homo erectus is in our family tree, but did we directly descend from it? Some anthropologists, a minority, believe so. A theory called the multi-regional hypothesis argues that, despite the great geographical distances, Homo erectus might have simultaneously evolved into Homo sapiens in different parts of the world due to a continuous genetic flow. However, this is a minority view today. Some might think that, since we know Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, the multi-regional hypothesis is correct. But the answer is yes and no. Genetic research has shown that human evolution occurred in multiple regions, Africa, Europe, and Asia, but the fossil record and genetic evidence suggest that we are still predominantly an African species. Most of our evolution occurred there, though not exclusively. There was some mixing with other archaic hominids, but not enough to fully support the multi-regional hypothesis. Other scientists believe that there may have been an intermediate species. The theory is that the Homo erectus that stayed in Africa evolved into a species called Homo heidelbergensis around 800,000 years ago. Then, Homo heidelbergensis also migrated out of Africa. Those who stayed in Africa evolved into Homo sapiens, while those who reached Europe and Asia became Neanderthals and Denisovans. However, the exact nature of these relationships is unclear, and this debate is affectionately known as the middle mess. It's hard to resolve because there are few fossils from that crucial period, between 800,000 and 500,000 years ago, and each new discovery only complicates the picture further. Every time we see chimpanzees or gorillas playing or interacting like a family, we can't help but see ourselves reflected in them. Their gestures, expressions, and play seem too familiar. Now imagine if we could travel back in time 1,000,000 years ago to a cave in Indonesia and observe a family of Homo erectus sitting around a fire, cooking, making tools, laughing, and perhaps even talking. Surely we would recognize them as humans. Their connection to us, their inherent humanity, would be obvious. Despite all the differences and the vast span of time, they would be unmistakably human. We could say there's a little bit of Homo erectus in all of us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to support it with a like, subscribe, and turn on the little bell so you don't miss out on new content. Thanks for being part of this amazing community. See you soon in the next video.